Welcome to LockerBlogger.com. This is the 60, and I'm your host, Mike Bako. March Madness is here. What does that mean? That means the NCAA tournament. As everyone knows, everyone's filling out their brackets. We're joined today by the radio personalities from Syracuse, Seton Hall, and Pittsburgh. Let's go around the table and introduce yourself, guys.
I'm Matt Carulli from WPTS Pittsburgh.
I'm Corey Eisenberg, also from WPTS Pittsburgh.
My name is Brian Wisowaty. I'm from WSOU.
I'm Jastremski from WAER Radio in Syracuse, New York.
So, Syracuse, New York. Syracuse was not very highly touted going into this season. Neither was Syracuse or Pittsburgh, but somehow Syracuse, after a very disappointing early season loss to Lemoyne of all teams, has come back, not only gained a #1 ranking during the season, but really moving forward into the NCAA tournament. Very high hopes for Syracuse.
Yeah, you know, you say that. You lose guys like Johnny Flynn, Eric Devendorf, and Paul Harris off last year's Sweet 16 team, and you say to yourself, you expect the expectations for Syracuse to be lowered going into 2009, 2010. Then you have that, preseason awful loss to Lemoyne. Now remember, guys, they did play man-to-man. If they played zone, they might have still won by 25 points. But nonetheless, the expectations weren't too high. Then you beat Cal, you beat North Carolina. And I never would have expected this team to be contending for a national championship because, despite their goals at the Big East tournament, despite their goals, just to get into the NCAA tournament, now the goal is to win the whole thing. And Syracuse is definitely capable of doing so.
Let's take a larger view of the entire season. As we mentioned, Syracuse started off the season with that horrible loss, but they've had a lot of great games this year, beating Georgetown twice during the regular season. Rank for me, how do you think the teams going into the season fared compared to their preseason estimations?
Well, you mentioned Syracuse. They were 6th in the coaches poll. Never would have expected them to be #1. And you know what? You didn't expect them to be #1 until they took down Villanova. Mm-hmm. Because Villanova, bringing back a guy like Scotty Reynolds, bringing back the great guard play, Stokes, Fisher, Redding, all those guys coming back with Jay Wright, you expected that to be the team to be the favorite going in. Then you had West Virginia with Bobby Huggins, Ebanks, Butler, and all those guys at West Virginia. They were bringing back a lot of good players. So those are two teams. They're at the top of the Big East, but if you would have told me Syracuse and Pittsburgh would have been 1-2 going into the Big East Conference, when the Big East tournament going into the NCAAs, when the season started, I would have told you you're nuts. You're out of your mind. But Villanova, West Virginia, those were the favorites going in, and they're still very good teams. I don't know about you guys. I would say Villanova and West Virginia are still teams that are very capable of making a run come
Now,
March.
who do you think were the biggest disappointments in the season? We're talking about teams that exceeded expectations. Who do you think never lived up to them?
I would have to go Georgetown, and they were definitely a team with Greg Monroe, who was a first-team All-Big East player. They had very high expectations coming in. They barely got a bye in the Big East tournament. They finished 8th, and I would have thought at the beginning of the season that they would have been a team in the top 4 and maybe not Syracuse and Pitt.
So with Georgetown, you were mentioning that we have Monroe coming back in a great pedigree with John Thompson III. What do you think their chances are? And, well, actually, let's break down their season. Very highly rated. They had that great win against Duke when Obama was at courtside, and they had a lot of momentum. And then sort of going into the second half of the season, not so much. How do you rank them going into the tournament?
Well, Georgetown's been a great team all year long, as you said. They beat Duke. They were in the top 10 for most of the season. They've had a little bit of a rough stretch here. They're still going to be in the NCAA tournament. We all know that. And I think they could be a threat. I definitely see them posing maybe a big upset over a 1 seed, a 2, maybe even a 3. I really like Georgetown, and I think they are one of the best teams in the Big East, even though they finished 8th.
So we have a little bit of disagreement down at the end.
I'll be honest, I completely disagree. And this may sound biased coming from a Syracuse guy. Syracuse, Georgetown, one of the biggest rivalries in college basketball. But the problem with Georgetown, they're not deep. They have one guy they're bringing off the bench. If you get into these March Madness type of situations, sometimes you need to rely on your bench to, carry you through a tough spot against maybe a tough mid-major. I'll be honest with you. I wouldn't be shocked if Georgetown was a 5 seed or a 6 seed if they got bounced in the first round. Now, are they capable of getting to a Sweet 16 Elite 8? Absolutely. But do I think they will? No, because they have no depth, and Monroe is just simply not consistent enough. He's not as good as he should be. Despite all the potential, despite how good a player he can be at times, he doesn't bring it consistently. So I say Georgetown's a team that gets bounced early.
And you see it firsthand every day. I mean, Syracuse has the player of the year, but they also have a bench that could almost act as starters. They're going 7 deep, and those are 7 guys that can start not only on Syracuse, but pretty much any other team in the conference and in the nation.
Oh, no doubt about it. Big East Sixth Man of the Year in Chris Joseph, and the Sporting News Sixth Man of the Year in Scoop Jardine. And those guys essentially do play starters minutes. Joseph has been unbelievable. He probably gets to the bucket better than anybody on Syracuse. And Jardine essentially is the point guard for Syracuse. I know Brandon Trish is the starter. Scoop Jardine plays the starters minutes. That guy can create. He makes great passes. He sets up Rick Jackson or Renzo Nwaku down low, and he'll find 80 rounds for those open threes. Jardine and Joseph, although Syracuse's bench maybe not as deep as it should be, only going 7 guys, as 7 deep as they could possibly be in college basketball.
So we're talking about coaches, and you just mentioned Norm Roberts, very much on the hot seat, but there are a lot of big-name coaches in the Big East. Who do you think really distinguishes themselves with their team, taking what they are known for as being, big-name coach, but then team with not as much talent? Do you think that, obviously, someone like Jamie Dixon you were speaking about before, I think Dixon, in his tenure as coach, is almost close to being a record setter in terms of the most wins in his first 7 or 8 seasons as a coach. So he's obviously someone that elevates the play of his team.
Yeah, he is. Whenever Ben Howland was here, he really started this program to make it what it is today. And Jamie Dixon, I think, has surpassed him as far as coaching ability, recruiting ability. Ben Howland started everything, and Dixon wouldn't be there without Howland. But Dixon is the guy right now who just makes this program. And, like I said earlier, they exceeded expectations this year. They were able to get some good recruits. They got an All-American this year, and Dante Taylor, who's finally starting to play a little bit better. So, Dixon, I think, in my mind, is the coach of the year in the Big East, just because he took a team that was picked 9th to finish in the conference, and they finished them 2nd with almost nobody.
So you like Dixon. I think there's going to be a little bit of disagreement at the far end there.
Don't get me wrong. Jamie Dixon has done an outstanding job, and Buzz Williams at Marquette has also done an outstanding job. I think these are, and Stan Heath at South Florida, a team that's been irrelevant in the Big East, got to 9-9 this year. But the bottom line is, who finished number 1? A team that was picked 6th finished number 1 after losing a guy who was in the NBA, lottery picking Johnny Flynn. A guy in Devendorf, although his off-the-court troubles, he still was the 2nd leading scorer for Syracuse. Paul Harris, say what you want about him, 3rd leading scorer for Syracuse. You lose those 3 guys, Boeheim has gotten this team to fit into his system, and they were number 1 in the country. They were number 1 in the Big East. As great a job as Jamie Dixon did, the Big East Coach of the Year and the National Coach of the Year got to be Jimmy Boeheim.
And you can make a case that Pittsburgh lost just as much, if not
Absolutely.
more, last year, losing 4 starters, including DeJuan Blair, Sam Young, Levance Fields, Tyrell Biggs. So Dixon also has lost a lot of players, but really picked it up to finish 2nd.
No doubt about it. I mean, you could say either one of those guys. It's really, flip of a coin. The only reason I would give the edge to Boeheim is because his team won the whole shebang. They won the Big East outright. And I don't think anybody out there, any publication, anyone in Syracuse would have said Syracuse would be not only the first team in the Big East, but a very good chance to get a number 1 seed come March. Guess what? That's why I got to give it to Jim Boeheim.
And it all comes down to surpassing expectations. Sorry about that, but I think that just to kind of change the discussion a little bit, so we're not talking about, let's look at Pittsburgh and Syracuse. You're talking about Big East powers, teams that have been there. The Jamie Dixon era is almost heralded, and of course we know about Jim Boeheim. It goes without saying. We don't have to throw his resume down on the table because we all know what he's done there. Let's look at a guy like Jay Wright at Villanova, just to sustain success, and I bring this perspective because of a school like Seton Hall. Jay Wright comes in, he enters the Big East, he builds a program now to the point where at Villanova you expect in a down year you're still going to the NIT. It's not like it's a massive school. It's not like it's had great basketball tradition. They don't have tons of banners hanging up from Final Four appearances. They have, of course, 85.
They have that one.
And now last year as well. And that's what Seton Hall, I think, is almost pointing to as well. That's the hope. We've been there in 1989. Can we build up a program just like that? And I've always used that comparison between Seton Hall and Villanova, 2 small, local Catholic schools. If you find the right guy, the right small-time coach, you bring him in, that might be the way to do it. I think that Seton Hall's tried to do that with Bobby Gonzalez, and they haven't been able to. But I really am just always amazed about how Jay Wright can sustain success with this league and really just build up a program where, again, who would have thought after the run last year, everyone kind of thought that Villanova, which is getting there, maybe, I don't want to say by a fluke, but maybe just not the expected team to make the Final Four, and they're right in the same spot to do it again this year.